Aloha and welcome to Wisdom Flow Yoga Teacher Training Modules. In this module, we look at systematic steps for teaching a safe headstand. We playfully call it Headless Headstand. The reason we do that is because a healthy headstand is relying on the shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdle being integrated and strong, not relying on the pressure on the top of the head. In this way, headstand can actually become something that is healthy for the neck, meaning that instead of compressing the neck, a steady shoulder girdle gives you the opportunity to stretch out through the top of the head and actually elongate and traction your neck while you're in headstand. All right, let's start with the first step. The first step is the hand template. Often the hands will be in this type of position in headstand. And in this position, the hands cannot offer any support for the shoulder girdle. If instead we cross the thumbs and bring the finger pads to the back of the hands, we have a steady template of interlaced hands. And if you will look at this template, you see that the big knuckle, the wrist, and the elbow are all in one line in both hands, and both sides. You will also see that the inner wrists are creating just a little bit of a curve, a perfect nest to receive the head. So the inner wrist here on each side should be hugging into the sides of the head when we put the head into the cradle here that we're creating for it. Now this bottom pinky finger should come inside the hand so it's not karate chopped when we put the pressure down. Now before we add the head here, this line from the outer wrist to the elbow tip we call the blade of the forearm, and it will be important that your awareness is clear and keen on this line from the outer wrist to the elbow tip. Yeah, these blades of forearms, we push into the mat and hug into the midline. We don't move them to the midline, but hug the energy in to create a steady uplifting energy for the head. So, first step, let's find this hand template where the finger pads are on the back of the hands. They're not between the knuckles, they're on the back of the hands, and they're not casually resting there, they're pushing in. The thumbs are crossed. They never uncross. Keep them crossed. Bottom pinky finger, bring it inside. And then put your hands on the ground and look at them. Make sure that you have about an inch and a half opening between the heels of the hands. So they're not closed, but they're not falling open. And feel the finger pads pushing into the back of the hands. If you lift the knuckles a little bit, you get the outer wrists on the mat a little more firmly. So there's a lot of precision, but it'll add up to a headstand that is super therapeutic and safe. Okay, so the next step is we're going to find where do we put the head on the ground. Do we put the head on the ground right on the crown of the head? Here? When I put the head down right on the crown of the head, you might see I don't have much of a cervical curve. It's a flat neck. Yeah, that is not as safe as having a curve in the neck. A curve in the spine acts like a spring when pressure is put on it, just like the springs of your car, and it actually can minimize the compression. So we want to find a little bit of cervical curve when we put our head on the ground. And that means that we're going to be putting the head on the ground closer to the hairline. Right? So closer to the top of the forehead, probably right in between these 2 points, the top of the head and the hairline. And you'll see when I do that, I have more of a cervical curve. I'm not sure if you can see that, but a little more cervical curve. And it makes sense because as I bring the hips forward, there's going to be a natural movement more towards the very top of my head. Yep. But right now, what we're looking at is finding that steady hand template and learning to own it, not letting the hands pull apart, and then finding that just right spot for you between the hairline and the top of the head to place the head. And this step cannot be breezed through. Now from here, we want to feel 2 energies we call hug and shrug. The hug is
The inner wrists hugging the sides of the head. I'm doing it now, I'm not doing it. I'm doing it, and it's charged by the push of the finger pads into the back of the hands. I'm doing it, not doing it, doing it, not doing it, doing it, not doing it. That's the first thing to practice. So you could pause the video now, find your hand template, and practice squeezing the inner wrists into the sides of the head and then letting go. Squeezing and letting go. When we do this repetition
of doing it, not doing it, that's when the neural networks start to learn and you start to remember and more easily feel for these energies that build that safe and therapeutic headstand. All right, now the second thing we're going to look at as we set up the foundation is the movement of the shoulder heads. So when the shoulder heads move to the front plane, you can see here, the shoulder blades get pulled off the upper back, and that is a disintegrated or a weak shoulder girdle. So we want the shoulder heads to move into the back plane of the body. Easy enough when we're upright, but what happens when we go upside down? In other words, how can we get this same integrated shoulder girdle when we set up for headstand? So the mantra, or the way to guide yourself into that, is set up the hand template, bring the head down right behind the hairline, and hug. Now, shrug is the other part of the mantra of hug and shrug, and this is about shoulder heads. So I say shoulder heads, shrug towards the knuckles. I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. So this again is a place where you would pause this video and get down and try to get a clear neural network of I know how to move my shoulder heads to the back plane when I'm setting up for headstand. And you can see here in this frame that my shoulder blades are close to the spine and set well on my upper back. That is a sign of an integrated shoulder girdle. Now, just for contrast and clarity, let me show you what it looks like if we move towards headstand without this clarity, without this integration in the shoulder girdle. I'm going to let my hands fall apart. Pretty common that you see this. And as I come up, I'm going to let my shoulder blades come off the back, and here I come. There is tons of pressure on my neck and head, and my shoulder girdle is not integrated and not supporting the pose. So this is what we're moving away from. This is why we're using so much precision in this setup for headless headstand. I hope that was enough clarity to get you enthused about the precision that we're working with. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to try as we put all of this together is simply lifting the hips. So you'll be in a down dog state, but your forearms will be on the ground and your shoulder girdle will be creating the support. So let's again move through the steps. I'm interlacing hands, finger pads push into the back of the hands, thumbs cross. The heels of the hands are open about an inch, bottom pinky finger inside. Okay, now the elbows you want to be right below the shoulders, right below the shoulder. You don't want too narrow here. Yeah, you want that nice wide base. Bring the head down right behind the hairline and hug. Don't stop hugging. So finger pads are alive, pushing into back of hands, and you feel the inner wrist hug in. Shrug. Shoulder heads go towards the knuckles. Now here's the thing. You got to watch that as you come up. You can't pop up or jerk the hips up. You have to move slowly so you can feel the integration and integrity of the integration in your shoulder girdle remain. And then I'll tiptoe a little bit in and find where it's a bit edgy. Now here's your next thing to practice. Remember the blade of the forearm from the inner wrist all the way to the elbow tip? I'm pushing down, now my head's off the ground. And then I'm not pushing down, it touches. I'm pushing down, my head's off the ground. And then I'm releasing it back down. I'm pushing down, and now I'm going to keep a couple of breaths here, take a couple of breaths here, with my head off the ground. My forearms are hugging in. I'm moving my shoulder heads towards my knuckles, my heart towards my toes. And maybe you can see I'm practicing
letting my shoulder girdle be the foundation of this inversion rather than dumping onto the top of the head. This is part of what we mean by headless headstand. So here is the next step where you might pause and practice pulsing the head off the ground by pushing up or pushing down with the forearms and lifting up with the sit bones, and then let it go, doing it, not doing it, doing it, not doing it. Okay, now once we have that, we can move towards bringing a little bit more vertical energy into the torso by moving back toward the wall and doing half headstand and going back to those pulses of building more strength and support from the shoulder girdle and letting the pressure on the head be optional. So, set yourself up at the wall if you're not already there, and bring your heels right against the wall to get your spacing. And once your arms are vertical and your heels are brushing the wall, you'll bring your forearms down so that the center of your forearm is where your hand was. And set up for your headstand there. Same thing, interlace the hands in the hand template. And make sure that you have just a bit of space between the heels of the hands. Place the head down more towards the hairline so you feel a bit of cervical curve. And then hug and shrug. Hug the inner wrists and the sides of the head. Shrug the shoulder heads toward the knuckles. Watch the steadiness of the upper back, the shoulder girdle, as you lift your hips. Push down with the forearms and feel the head light. And now here's the challenge. Can you keep the push down and hug in of the forearms, push into the mat, hug to the midline, as you take one foot to the wall, straighten that leg, and the other foot comes up. And here you are in half headstand, and can you practice push with the forearms, heads off the ground, let it go. Push, let it go. And then push down with the forearms, the sit bones are reaching up. Now hold and breathe here, and can you stretch out through the top of the head just to get a light touch? Go back to some of the actions of hugging the wrists to the head, shrugging the shoulders toward the knuckles, softening the heart to the wall. From here you could take one leg up, and you want to feel, again, the headless headstand. It's optional where your head is. You're strengthening the shoulder girdle to support the headstand. So you're never compressing the neck in a headstand. So this is our second step. Bringing the feet to the wall and seeing if you can keep the head light or lifted as you do this. Okay. So when we get ready to go into full headstand, we want to make sure that we're not having to swing our legs up. All of this, of course, is suggested. You do your best, but ultimately, we don't want to fling the legs into the air. We want the core to be working to create a lift of the legs that is slow, almost like piking up, so the legs stay connected to the core, which is connected to the upper body, the shoulder girdle, which is the foundation. So there's intentionality and smoothness rather than let's wing it and see what happens. So you would do something like, as you come up, or as you set up, you're again looking for those landmarks. My finger pads push into the back of my hands. Bottom pinky finger inside, thumbs remain crossed. I'm looking for the blade, the feeling of outer wrist all the way to elbow, snuggling into the mat. And then I put my head down, hug, shrug. Hug the inner wrists to the sides of the head, shrug. And then as you come up, you're pushing down with the forearms and walking in, and you're starting to get the hips right over the shoulders. You want to make sure you're not blowing out here, blowing out the shoulder girdle. You got to bend the knees, move the heart towards the bent knees, and the shoulder heads and armpits away from the bent knees. You got to feel the power of the upper back. That's the stability for headstand, not dumping into the head. And then when you lift one leg, if you make it toned, reaching through the heel and the ball of the foot, hook the tailbone into it, the belly can start to pull the other foot off the ground, right? And you're not moving the legs into vertical so quickly. You keep a little bend, a hinge at the hips, so you don't go into banana back. And a hook of the tailbone so the belly is holding steady onto the legs as they come into vertical. Really important. And then you can play here. It gets a little more subtle the push of the forearms and the lift of the head, and then release. You're doing these subtle little pulses, taking the head off the ground. And there's loads of balance that's happening here. You're learning to get nice and even between the outer wrists and the elbows. But this sets you up for steadiness in forearm stand, because when you take the head off the ground, that's essentially where you are in a forearm stand. All right, so headless headstand, lots of systematic steps for coming into the pose in a way that is therapeutic for your neck and strengthening for the shoulder girdle. Have fun with it, take your time. Daily practice is the key to success. Thanks for tuning in.